It's been said that with electric vehicles, you can either go fast or you can go far, but you can't do both. And that's because as you increase your speed, the range gets shorter and shorter that you can drive without stopping to recharge. However, some of the newer electric vehicles are surprisingly efficient at higher speeds, and they also charge really quickly. So that old rule doesn't necessarily hold true. Now, I recently did a 70-mile-an-hour highway range test with a 2025 Porsche Macan EV rear-wheel drive, and I posted that video here on State of Charge. What I didn't mention in that video was that on the very next day, I took the same car, drove it on the same route at 80 miles an hour, repeated the range test to see the difference between driving at 70 miles an hour and 80 miles an hour. And that's what we're going to take a look at here today. We're going to see just how much farther the vehicle went driving 10 miles an hour slower. And we'll also look at what your best policy would be if you were on a very long road trip that was going to include multiple stops at a DC fast charger. Should you drive at 70 miles an hour to extend your range, or should you drive at 80 miles an hour, take the range hit, but then charge and get back out on the highway? We'll do the math and we'll see which policy would be the best if you really needed to get to your destination as quickly as possible. Let's get into it. State of Charge is powered by Qmerit, North America's premier installer of electric vehicle charging equipment. After I've helped you decide which charger to buy, follow the link in the description of my videos and have Qmerit install it. And if you do follow that link, Qmerit will waive the $150 installation deposit. But this is an exclusive offer for State of Charge followers. So in order to get that offer, you must follow the link in the description of my videos. All right, well, for those that don't know, the Macan EV is the brand's second all-electric offering, coming a few years after the Porsche Taycan, which is one of my favorite electric vehicles. The Macan comes in a variety of different configurations. There's a rear-wheel drive version. That's the version that I did the range test with because it's the longest range Macan that you can get. And for my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test, I asked Porsche if they could provide me with the one with the longest range. And I also got it with the 20-inch aero wheels because those would be the wheels that also accommodate the longest driving distance. You can get larger wheels as optional, but they're going to probably shave a couple miles off. So I had the longest range Macan available when I did this range test. But there are, as I mentioned, 3 other versions. So let's take a quick look at the family of Macan EVs that Porsche offers. Okay, first up is the Macan rear-wheel drive. That has 355 horsepower, 415 pound-feet of torque, goes 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds, and has a top speed of 136 miles per hour. Has an EPA estimated range of 315 miles per charge. That's the trim that I did the range tests with. But then there's the Macan 4. It's an all-wheel drive version. It has 402 horsepower, 479 pound-feet of torque, 0 to 60 in about a half a second faster than the rear-wheel drive version. It's 4.9 seconds. Same top speed of 136 miles per hour, and the EPA range is 308 miles. And then we have the Macan 4S, also all-wheel drive, 509 horsepower, 578 pound-feet of torque, 0 to 60 time in 3.9 seconds, a top speed of 149 miles per hour, and the EPA range is 288 miles. And then we have the top spec Macan Turbo, 630 horsepower, 833 pound-feet of torque, a 0 to 60 time of 3.1 seconds, a top speed of 160 miles an hour, and it has the same EPA estimated range as the Macan 4S, and that's 288 miles. Okay, so as I mentioned, I did these range tests with the rear-wheel drive Macan with the 20-inch aero wheels because that has the longest driving range, and I wanted to do the range test on the Macan that would provide the longest range. That 70-mile-an-hour highway range test I posted on State of Charge about 2 weeks ago. So first off, let's just quickly take a look at the summary of that range test. Okay, from 100% charge down to 75% charge, I went 93.5 miles, and I had an average consumption of 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour. From 75% down to 50%, I went 89 miles, and the total miles at that point was 182.5 miles, again 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour. From 50% down to 25%, I went 84 miles, so I was at 266.5 miles once I had driven it from 100% down to 25%, and that consumption rate was rock solid for the whole trip, holding at 3.7 mile per kilowatt hour. And in the final leg, from 25% down to 0, well actually I ended the range test at 1%, was 76.7 miles. So we finished up with a total miles driven of 343.2 miles and a consumption rate of 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour. But I will note that when I ended the range test, the vehicle was at 1% state of charge, and it said it had 2 miles of remaining range. So I'm pretty sure I could have stretched it out to 345 miles. And that was a really good showing as far as I'm concerned, because we beat the EPA range rating by almost 30 miles, driving at a constant 70 miles an hour. So that shows that the Macan is geared for higher speed driving. Some EVs just do better at higher speeds. It is a Porsche. It's probably engineered for Autobahn driving, so it does perform well at higher speeds than some of the other electric vehicles that I've tested, actually than most of the other EVs that I've tested. So next up, as I mentioned, the very next day, I actually gave the keys to my friend and also assistant here at State of Charge, Pete Bremy, and he took the Macan out on the highway, repeated this range test. It was the very next day. The thing is, in order to maintain 80 miles an hour here in New Jersey, you just can't do it during the day. It's impossible. He did it overnight. So Pete was a champ. He got in the car, he headed out, he drove till like 3 in the morning when the turnpike was pretty much empty, or a lot more empty than it is during the day. He was able to maintain that 80 miles an hour the whole time. So let's take a look at the results, just going 10 miles an hour faster. Okay, in the first leg, from 100% down to 75% state of charge, Pete went 72.1 miles and averaged 2.8 mile per kilowatt hour. From 75% down to 50%, went 69.8 miles, and the total miles at that point was 141.9 miles, and he was averaging 2.9 mile per kilowatt hour at that point. From 50% down to 25%, he did the same distance as the last leg, 69.8 miles, and his total miles at that point was 211.7 miles, and he had a 2.9 mile per kilowatt hour consumption average. In that final leg, from 25% down to 0, he went 72.7 miles, finishing up with 284.4 mile driven, and the consumption rate at that point was 3 miles per kilowatt hour. Pete ended the test with a 0% state of charge, but the estimated range did show 1 mile of estimated range. So as you would expect, the Macan didn't go nearly as far at 80 miles an hour as it did at 70 miles an hour. But just how much of a difference? Let's take a look at those numbers side by side. Okay, so when I line up the numbers next to each other, you could see the difference. And I'll drop down to the total there. At 70 miles an hour, it went 343.2 miles. At 80 miles an hour, 284.4 miles. Now that's a difference of 58.8 miles. And if you remember, when I finished up the 70 mile an hour range test, the vehicle showed that there was 2 miles of estimated remaining range. When Pete ended the 80 mile an hour range test, he had 1 mile of estimated remaining range. So if you want to give the vehicle that 1 extra mile, it would be 59.8 miles, or basically rounded up to 60 miles. So basically, you can drive about 60 miles farther if you just slow down from 80 miles an hour to 70 miles an hour if you're on a long road trip. And then let's take a look at the consumption. 3.7 mile per kilowatt hour, driving at 70 miles an hour. Driving at a constant 80 miles an hour, the Macan averaged 3.0 mile per kilowatt hour. And that's a difference of 0.7 mile per kilowatt hour. It's a pretty substantial difference just for going 10 miles an hour faster. All right, so it's clear and it's no surprise that simply by slowing down, you can go a lot farther. It's one of the tips that I've been giving out for many years when people are trying to stretch their range to get to their destination. I know people talk a lot, well, I lower the heat or I turn off the air conditioning. That stuff helps, but what helps the most is slowing down. If you can just drive slower, it'll make a huge difference with all electric vehicles. I did this test with a Cadillac Lyriq last year, where I drove a 70-mile-an-hour highway range test. Then I did the 80-mile-an-hour in back-to-back days. The Lyriq actually went 85 miles farther at 70 miles an hour than it did at 80 miles an hour. So the fact that the Macan only did about 60 miles less shows that it is a more efficient vehicle at higher speeds than the Lyriq is. And the Lyriq is a bigger vehicle. It's more boxy. The batteries are about the same size, to be honest with you. The Lyriq is just slightly bigger than the Macans, but the Lyriq took a much bigger hit than the Macan did. But what does that mean as far as going on a very long trip? Let's say, you need to stop 3 or 4 times. You're driving 1,000 miles or 800 miles, something like that. What would be the best policy? Drive 10 miles an hour slower, slow and steady, and then maybe eliminate one of the potential charging stops, or just drive faster, blaze away, and then pull over, charge up to 80% and move on. Well, that actually would be the best policy. And it's partially because the Macan is efficient at higher speeds, more efficient than other vehicles, but really because how well it charges, how well it DC fast charges. Now, this takes into consideration that you have working 350 kilowatt DC fast chargers along your route, and you can kind of stop wherever you want to, which I know isn't always the circumstance, but if it is, driving at 80 miles an hour would get you to your destination faster. Let's take a 3-hour segment of driving. Driving 3 hours at 70 miles an hour will get you 210 miles. Driving 3 hours at 80 miles an hour would get you 240 miles, okay? So you're 30 miles ahead. So let's say you drove 3 hours, you decided it's time to stop and rest, maybe grab a coffee and charge. You're at 210 miles with the 70 mile an hour. You're at 240 miles driving 80 miles an hour. You pull off at the 240 mile mark driving 80 miles an hour. You plug into a DC fast charger, provided there's one, within a couple minutes off of the highway. Let's say 2.5 minutes for you to get off the highway and plug in. So we'll take 5 minutes off your time to go plug in and then get back out onto the highway, which is reasonable if the DC fast charger is close to the highway or at a rest stop. The Porsche Macan EV can charge from 10% to 80% in 21 minutes. So in 21 minutes, you can be, well, let's say 26 minutes, because we're going to give you 5 minutes to go plug in, unplug, and leave. In 26 minutes, you could be back out onto the highway and driving along at 80 miles an hour. If you were driving at 70 miles an hour for 3 hours, you're only at 210 miles. So let's say you continue driving. How long would it take you to drive that extra 30 miles from the 210 mile mark that you were at 3 hours to the 240 mile mark that the Macan driving at 80 miles an hour would took? 26 minutes. So from the time it would take you to get from your point at 3 hours to where the 80 mile an hour Macan was charging at is the exact amount of time it would have taken the Macan to pull off the highway, plug in, charge to 80%, and get back out onto the highway. So you would meet, he would be at 80%, and you would be at somewhere around 30% at that point. So it definitely proves out that for long road trip, if you need to make multiple stops at a DC fast charger, the best policy would be to drive at 80 miles an hour, over 70 miles an hour at least. I don't know exactly at what speed would be the perfect speed to drive, but I can tell you 80 miles an hour, because of the way the Macan charges so quickly, you'll get to your destination faster than you would if you drove at 70 miles an hour. Now, I referenced my Lyriq test last year where I drove at 70 miles an hour and I drove at 80 miles an hour. I don't know if that would hold true with the Lyriq because number one, it went 85 miles less at 80 miles an hour. And number two, it takes more than twice as long to charge a Lyriq from 10% to 80% than it does a Macan EV. It takes somewhere around 47, 48 minutes to charge from 10 to 80% with a Lyriq, while with a Macan, 20 to 21 minutes. That's all it takes. 10 to 80%, you're done. You're back out onto the highway. So this doesn't hold true with all EVs, but for the Macan EV, for sure, you'll get to your destination quicker if you buzz along at 80 miles an hour, provided there's charging stops in convenient locations for you to pull off and recharge. Okay, so that's speed-wise. How about cost? Driving the vehicle faster, your consumption rate is worse, so you are going to use more electricity. Let's take a quick look at what that difference would be. All right, so you see here I have the 70 mile an hour range test and the 80 mile an hour range test with the miles driven. Also have the consumption rate, 3.7 mile per kilowatt hour compared to 3.0 mile per kilowatt hour. I used two different examples here. How much it would cost to charge a Macan EV to drive 1,000 miles if you were charging at home. And I used my current home electricity rate. I'm actually paying a little bit less than that, but the average cost of electricity here in the state of New Jersey is 19.75 cents per kilowatt hour. So I just rounded it up to 20 cents per kilowatt hour. And I also included 10% charging losses, because whenever you charge your EV, there's charging losses. You don't get the full amount into the battery pack. So even with 10% charging losses, it would cost me $59 to drive a Macan EV at 70 miles an hour, 1,000 miles if I was charging at home. And if I wanted to drive it at 80 miles an hour, it would cost me $73. And since we're talking about road trips here, I added the cost to drive it 1,000 miles using public DC fast chargers. I used 40 cents per kilowatt hour because you can definitely get that, particularly if you're a member of some of the networks. I know there's a lot higher prices out there on different networks, but in many instances, at least myself, when I drive, I can usually find charging for somewhere around 40 cents per kilowatt hour. But look at how much the price goes up. And again, this includes 10% charging losses. $119 to drive 1,000 miles at 70 miles per hour, and $147 to drive 1,000 miles if you were driving at 80 miles an hour and averaging 3 miles per kilowatt hour in a Porsche Macan EV. And for that graphic, I used the average cost of electricity here in New Jersey where I live. But the average cost of electricity in the US is actually less. It's just under 13 cents per kilowatt hour. I know there's a lot of areas that pay a lot more than that. Right here near New Jersey and Connecticut, the electricity rates are really high. Out in California, they're really high also in different areas. But there's some parts in the country where people pay like 8 cents per kilowatt hour, especially when it's off peak. So it makes a big difference in where you live. And if you do have an EV, you have to look into time of use plans with your electricity provider and charge overnight when there's low cost electricity, if that's offered, because you could save a lot of money with that. All right, well, that's pretty much all I have here. I just wanted to make this comparison. I thought it was an interesting comparison, driving at 70 miles an hour and driving at 80 miles an hour. You could see the difference. The Macan goes, I think it's like 21% farther if you just slow down from 80 miles an hour to 70 miles an hour. And, you know, if you're on a trip where you have to get around 300 miles of range, as long as you're in relatively mild weather, you can do it with the rear-wheel drive Macan EV. Just take it easy. Just knock it down a few miles an hour and you'll get your destination. That's a good policy with all electric vehicles. I always have people sending me their stories about, I turned the heat off, I did this, I didn't even want to use the windshield wipers. I'm like, you're crazy. Those things, the heat uses some energy, but the best thing you can do is just slow down, and it makes a huge difference with your range. But if you're on a really long trip and you have to make stops to charge, the Macan blurs the lines between what's the best policy, between going slower or going faster, because it is more efficient than the average EV at higher speeds, and it recharges so quickly, 10 to 80% in like 20, 21 minutes. And that's amazing because it's got a 100 kilowatt hour battery pack. The usable capacity is 95 kilowatt hour, but the total capacity is 100 kilowatt hour. So it's a big, beefy battery pack, and you get 10 to 80% in like 20 to 21 minutes consistently. So Porsche did a really good job both with the range and charging abilities on the Macan EV, as they did with their first EV, the Taycan. Well, that's all I have here today on this comparison. I hope you learned a little bit from it. And if this is your first time here at State of Charge, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming electric vehicle news and reviews. And as always, thanks for watching.